It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. It's another podcast, gentlemen. We're back.
Hi.
Just say hello. Introduce yourselves so people know who the heck you are.
I'm Chad Jettner.
I'm Peter Lawrence.
I'm Cal Bacher, and today we're going to talk about plain vanilla. Boring, simple.
The ice cream, coffee flavor.
Just in our code, in our configurations, keeping things as simple as possible, keeping the desk free of clutter.
Well, okay, so let's not talk about vanilla as though it were some sort of generic boring thing, because it's not. I mean, cream flavored ice cream, it would be pretty boring, but you throw a little vanilla in there and it's the number one flavor. So I don't think we're talking about
completely
nothing.
boring. I work with low-code tools where I have to put actions together, logic, functionality, things like that. And there's many ways to do things. And I try to do things the dead simplest, minimalist way possible. And there's a few reasons for that. Primarily, it's because it's the dead simplest, easiest way. But also, it's cleaner. And if someone else needed to go in there and pick up after me, it's a lot easier to understand what's going on.
Let me ask this question. Do you think like low-code solutions tend to lend themselves to that philosophy more because of the sort of the upgrade and management is mostly out of your control?
You know, I think that, there's some of that where it's just a module you plug in. So it's like there's really no complexity. You're looking at a square with a name on it and some configuration options. But as it's grown and matured, there's a lot more features and functionality, but there's also improvements. Right. So, for example, you used to have to create and set variables for everything and loop through and grab a collection and then pull items out of the collection and set variables with them. And that was a lot of overhead. And now it's all just objects. Those objects just exist. It's creating those things for you. So you don't have to do any of that. And boy, does that make life easier. So they're constantly making those kinds of improvements and simplifying things. Which you go back and look at something you did, 5 years ago, and you're like, wow, I could do this with half of the complexity. Wow, there's a much easier way to do this. They create an action that does this for you. So I think that, it lends itself to simplicity because the things that do the things are the only things that do the things.
Okay. So Chad, sort of a Java-based or Java directional pointer here. With most of the advanced languages, things get easier as time goes on. There are new and additional libraries to make doing the complex more simple, right?
Yeah. I mean, so here's the thing. I think that what got us down this path was an article that our friend, Paul Weedell, a decade ago, right? And you can find it on our SDG websites. You say vanilla, I say value. And Paul's argument here is that, well, not really an argument. It's Paul's common sense that he imparted to us all is that hastily adopting shiny new objects can frequently be counterintuitive. I think that's a summary of the article, right? And I'm almost completely agree with our friend, and not just because I'm curmudgeonly about adopting new technologies, and not just because when I see something that people get excited about, I roll my eyes and think everybody's lost their damn mind.
Right.
But because, he makes a ton of super valid points, right? So you were talking about Java and some of the new features in Java. Yes, I love all the syntactic sugar that we get today, right? Does it make things better? I don't know. Honestly, we can accomplish the same thing with fewer lines of code these days. Sacrificing maybe a little bit of readability, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a fellow that's not 1000% up to speed on all of the language changes and you come across some new way of stuffing a predicate in a list and filtering out results, then now did you really, we had ways to do that before. Now we've got a slick little way that we've got to learn to do it now. Is it better? I don't know. Is it more supportable? I don't know. Probably not. But you're not going to do that because eventually everybody's going to catch
I was
on.
going to say in 3 years, it's going to be the way to have done it and the way to do it. And it'll look the old fashioned way will stop you in your tracks. Like, oh, yeah, that's right. I guess we used to do it that way. But now I'm going to change it to the new way.
What you're saying is that if there's a new tool, a new way of doing things, and you jump on it right away and it turns a paragraph into a sentence and you're new to it, like you don't know what that sentence is telling you. Like, but that all the code in that big purified down into this one line with a few parameters, and you're not used to, you've never seen it before. It doesn't tell you anything, so you don't really recognize it. So you get stuck on that conundrum. And then you have to scramble to figure it out.
And that's kind of a really, let's call it a contrived example, right? It's kind of what we're shooting for. Paul's point was there is a lot of new software coming out. Every day somebody comes up with a new way to invent the wheel, I guess.
Right.
So some of us have leapt onto those things and been rewarded, right? When .NET came out many, many moons ago, or when Java came out many, many, many moons ago, right? Yeah, there's 3 minis in Java and only 2 in .NET.
Well, because .NET had to copy us first, right? It had to exist to be copied, I guess.
Right.
Yes, and Java came completely out of the ether, all on its own, with no forethought or anything, right?
Are we fighting right now, Peter?
Because that was the first programming language, right? Java?
Yeah, Java was it. Oh, wait, no. I think there was one before that, or several dozen. Anyway,
I don't remember back that far, but
the point being is that people that jumped at, when Java came out first, I was doing C++, and Java seemed like, well, this is going to be cool someday. Sandbox, blah blah blah, and I don't really care about it right now. How do I solve my problem for this particular thing I'm working on? I don't have time to learn Java. There are those folks that did learn Java and embraced it, and Chad, you're probably one of those folks near to the start. We're rewarded for that, right? Like, you had a robust development environment. You probably felt some pain at first, but as it came out, it became a super strong language.
Yeah, and that's not me being good at picking technologies. That's just me being lucky, right? Like,
right. Absolutely.
Luckily, I hitched my wagon to a horse that is still pulling cargo. Right. It's so hard. And I think this is back to Wedel. This is what he was talking about. Like, it's early, that first phase of adoption, right, is so hard. And I think of it in ways like, and I'm this way with AI right now, right? It is new. It is exciting. It seems awesome, like super, super awesome. We really need more chatbots or sentiment analysis or anything like that. I don't know, right? Do we need AI generated content? I don't know. At this point in its life cycle, though, it is a fun toy, right? Just like Java was back then. That's how, I don't know that he specifically says this, but this is how I would treat adopting new technologies. Oh, this looks like a fun, shiny toy. Let's build a demo. Let's build something in it. But by golly, I am not going to build a product that, especially for our clientele, on something that is brand spanking new, right? That is,
I think, spending a few more seconds on AI since you brought it up. An interesting thing happened. A lot of, ChatGPT 3 has been around, and then 4 came out, and it was like, this is way better. And lately, people are claiming that they're ruining ChatGPT 4. It's getting worse. And
in what way?
The guy that made it, or an OpenAI guy, I don't know who it was, came out and said, well, I think that people are using it more and more, and the longer they've used it, the more limitations it's like they're now understanding how good it really is.
Right.
And it's not as good as they initially thought.
People are saying they're ruining it by getting false answers or not quite the answers they were shooting for before, whereas when they started to use ChatGPT, they were asking it the correct, simple questions, and it was giving more robust answers than they were looking for. And so then they raised their expectations, especially with 4, like, oh, well, this should be magic. I should be able to ask it to design me a starship to go to the moon or to Mars. And why haven't you done that yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a new thing people glommed onto and thought they were going to use, and it introduced complexity, and it didn't go as planned yet. Is that kind of a parallel to Paul's claims in his article?
I think so. I think
blog post.
That's getting ahead of themselves, right? Like,
right.
I want to use this tool in my enterprise today, and so I'm going to start using it, right? And there's always those folks that start using the technology, be it ChatGPT, Java, what have you. There were a lot of failed Java projects at the beginning, right?
Chad.
Like they just couldn't. I didn't catch that one, but I assume you said the name of a project. But time passes and it becomes a stronger product. And I think the point Paul was trying to make, and we tried to get him on, but we couldn't. Timing just didn't work out.
He's just in demand is what
he's in demand.
Yeah.
Right. But I think the point that he's trying to make is choosing technology and things for the enterprise is better served by being in the middle of the pack than being at the front of the pack. And the reason why software developers want to be at the front of the pack is because there's the end of the pack coming.
Right.
And the pack is getting smaller and smaller. Things come out and they become obsolete before you know it.
Knowing extremely little about Java, I have a question for you, Chad. I know there's tools like IntelliSense and IntelliJ, that kind of stuff. Does the code base get updated and improved, and modules and things like that? And then the tools, like, do they all have to kind of keep up with each other? And do they get kind of out of sync and become a problem if you're like moving too slow or moving too fast?
No, I mean, as new features are released in Java, right? So the Java language itself, as they come up with new sugar and as they come up with new ways to do things, yeah, our tools lag a tiny bit. But honestly, I mean, we're using, I think it's relatively, I don't know. I've only been using products from JetBrains, so IntelliJ and DataGrip and their whole suite of projects. I've only been doing that for like the last at least decade, right? And so maybe even more than a decade. And those guys are so ridiculously good at keeping up with features, right? Like they're gonna be ahead of it before you implement a given thing in your code base, right? So as I'm writing Java code, damn near all of it is backwards compatible, right? Unless people are doing like EJBs or that kind of nonsense anymore, but they're not. So all of the code is, for the most part, backwards compatible. And if it's not, then you just tag your SDK to the version of the code you need it to be, right? So like I can say, God forbid I'm writing something in Java 8, right? I could actually include a Java 8 JDK alongside in IntelliJ and say, here's the spec that I'm using, right? Basically. Then all the syntax highlighting and everything else will match. But yeah, I think as new features in the language come out, our tool sets are way ahead of us as far as adoption goes. So I don't ever worry really about my tools being able to keep up with new functionality in the language itself. I think I'd be more worried about adopting like a new framework, like a new thing, right? So we're on the Java side, and I'm sure you've got a pattern for this, Peter, on the .NET side. We use this thing called Spring and Spring Boot, right? And it kind of gives us a lot of niceties, and then our tools adopt those. And then if there was a competitor to Spring, there's not going to be built-in support there's not going to be a bunch of sugary shortcuts within my IDE that might exercise some other framework, right? Like people kind of not necessarily standardize, but there is a lot of momentum still behind the Spring thing. And
that's you bring up a good point. Like Spring has been around for a really long time, maybe too many's around, right? Many years. I don't even remember. It's beginning of Java and maybe 15 years.
Yeah. So Spring started. Actually, the idea for Spring came out of this book, J2EE Development Without EJB, right? By this dude named Rod Johnson. That was the foundations of this whole Spring framework. And I was just going to look up the published date, and that was 2004.
Okay.
I want to say 2004.
Almost 20 years, going on 20 years. So it's been a pretty well adopted, pretty strong thing. But if you were writing Spring in the year 2005, you would have been at the bleeding edge and you would have been lucky to have chosen it, right? But there were competitors or there were things that were going away, right? Like EJBs. If you hitched your wagon to EJBs and you never unhitched your wagon, be feeling pretty ancient right now, if I guess.
What's an EJB?
Enterprise Java Bean. So they had a lot of things going with coffee and Java and beans and
it's basically, I mean, it was an old school way to have Java objects talk to each other and call other objects, maybe across the network or, just in a distributed fashion, right?
Right.
And it was hard. I mean, it was tough. You'd have to generate your stub and your skeleton and everything else. And then you got to hope that the network configuration that you're deploying to actually supports all the protocols like they used. Oh, shoot. It wasn't always just straight TCP sockets. It was like UDP for some things. Right. And it was, boy, it was tricky to get right. And I don't know. I mean, obviously people successfully deployed projects that way, but then we came along, there was this new idea. Spring essentially gutted that entire aspect of, and that was really just one component of the J2EE spec, right? It was
right.
EJBs was part of that spec, and now it's, I don't even know if it might still be there. I don't know. I haven't checked. But
right.
Yeah, it's you're right. If we were adopting Spring in 2005, 2006, even the supportability of what we're building, and this is another thing that Paul mentions too, like total cost of ownership over a product, right, is not just the cost of time to build and blah blah blah. It's supportability. How long does it take to train support folks?
Right.
I'm lucky that Spring was always open source, so like there's no licensing fees or anything like that. Take all of that into account as you're building something on bleeding edge technology, and then figure out where you are.
Right.
So another example of this was we were previous gig early adapters of Neo4j, right? The graph database.
Yep.
And that was another, we just got kind of lucky. I mean, I don't know that people are as excited for graph databases these days as they were, I want to say a decade ago.
Yeah.
They're still neat. It's still fun, kind of. And it's still a different paradigm than what we're used to with just relational stuff. But again, we got kind of lucky. They kind of took off. I don't know that they're as huge as Spring or,
Right.
other stuff, but you are really just betting on when you
and
when
part
you
of it is holding back until the dust settles a little bit, right? Like the old saying with Microsoft products was never take 1.0 or never take 0.0.
Right.
Always wait for the 0.01 or the 0.1 because there were going to be issues. And you didn't want to be the person finding them. You wanted to be the person not finding them after they've been fixed. So,
And I think like the idea of staying in the pocket. So you're staying ahead of getting old and obscure and not working, not being supported, but you're staying back far enough that you can kind of maintain your vanilla simplicity, where you're not getting out of sync with tools, where you're not getting ahead of other developers, things like that. So how do you stay in that pocket? And how often is this even a consideration? Like, how often do you need to make these choices?
Well, it's becoming more and more common. Unfortunately or unfortunately, things like .NET are moving ahead, much faster than they used to. They've open sourced .NET now. And so it's getting a release every, I don't even know, I haven't looked, but it's getting a release way more frequently than it used to. I mean, .NET used to upgrade with Windows, and Windows used to upgrade in years, not in months or weeks. So you want to stay current, and that's another piece of the puzzle, is that you want to stay in the pocket. Don't fall out of the pocket either, because that's another trap that happens. Is like, well, I don't have time to upgrade this week, so I'm just going to ignore that problem for a while. And then now you've got technical debt that has become a lot larger problem.
Yeah.
Because some of the features may have been, turned off, or maybe there were warnings that, oh, this feature's going away in 2 releases, and you're 3 releases behind, so you didn't get those warnings until you tried to go to the latest and greatest, right? And that a lot of enterprises do that, right? Like you'll start at version 1, and instead of taking 2, you'll say, we'll wait for 3, and then we'll go to 3.
Right.
And those pains can be pretty ginormous sometimes.
I'm finding that there's a lot. It's kind of a firmer hand when it comes to like accepting the updates My least favorite day of the week is Update Tuesday.
Yeah.
And my least favorite time is when you're transitioning to a new OS. And it's like, okay, I need to get some laptops, but there's everything has the new OS on it. And so now I'm signing up for issues because it takes them a while to get it right. And it's not before they release it. It's happening after. And then there's security updates and then your hardware has to keep up with your updates, and Microsoft has its own version of drivers for other people's stuff that'll break your stuff because your BIOS isn't up to date or whatever. I've run into that situation twice in the last week.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces that are moving at the same time.
Other things had to be updated because they pushed out updates.
Right.
And so those problems were created, and that took my time. So it's like you can't really choose, you're being shoved forward by these changes. So there's a less you can do about it, but except for staying on top of the things that can happen.
Well, and worse is to ignore them or to push off those changes. As I look at my Windows 10 machine here that I'm currently talking on, I think, well, this is going to be a painful upgrade soon.
Well, and then I've got my home system I do everything with at home is not supported for the next version. So I'm going to hit a wall where, it's like, what are they going to do? Shut me down? Come to my house, take it away?
Nope. You just won't get updates, and eventually you won't be able to get software. Yep. And those same kinds of things happen to development platforms, right? Eventually you're not
Macs.
Eventually, you're not going to be able to get a library that works with the version of the core development software that you're using.
So how do we, and this is going to be me asking because I already know the answer for us at SDG, how do we, right way to do this, right? Like, when do you know when to adopt? When do you know when it's safe?
How do you know when spring is ready to take or entity framework is really the way that Microsoft is choosing to go or stuff like that, right?
Right. We do that we have our tech DNA, right? And it's public, right? Anybody can see kind of what we're thinking of as retired, something to investigate, right? So my thing with it's a fun demo, it's a fun toy, it's whatever. Right. So we've got all our fun toys listed, and we've got our stuff that we absolutely probably shouldn't be using anymore listed, and then we've got that middle ground that has the adopt phase, like yes, actively do this, right? And I think that's genius, right? And it's part of our secret sauces being at SDG, having that document around and having, 180 other consultants contributing to that, saying, here's what I'm seeing, here's what we're actually using at clients. This is really, really, this is useful, or this is nonsense, or whatever.
And having those discussions about this is done. No, don't start anything with that anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So, I've used that quite a bit, right? Like, hey, we need a new scheduling framework or a scheduling library. Should I do this or this? I'm like, oh, well, it's like folks have been saying this one's on its way out. And it's super helpful for people that are like me and you, Peter. We've done a lot of things, right? And I'm sure you've got your preferred tool set and I've got my preferred tool set. And if I didn't have other folks like Paul or, other developers that do what I do, kind of curious, a little more, maybe even more curious than I am, I'd probably still be doing, maybe not EJBs, but gosh darn it, I didn't hate struts as a framework. It's a Java framework for web applications, and I thought it was just fine.
Right.
It's a super, one of the most useful documents that we publish at SDG is that DNA, and our process for keeping it fresh and relevant is also pretty cool.
And I think that is a key helpful point, right? We have 180 people that are looking at little pieces of this whole thing that make up the DNA of SDG, or the DNA of SDG DNA, right? Of things that we're going to use, things that we're using, things that we want to use, things that we never, ever want to use in our entire lives ever again, those kinds of things, right?
And I think that pool of expertise, if you want to call it that, I know Chad doesn't like the word expert, but that you have multiple people multiple engagements, multiple tech stacks, and they're all investigating these things. You've got that kind of collective brain power behind it. And then when it comes to selection time, I think you get much more accuracy. And I think that like that DNA is pretty solid. It doesn't include everything. Like the low code, I think we haven't really done a lot in that space other than, don't use Designer anymore. InfoPath's going away,
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Peter, you mentioned something about, now I'm losing my train of thought. I'm drifting, but the future proofing side of keeping things in the pocket.
No, absolutely. I mean, I know from my standpoint as an architect on things, I try to look for software that will fit with the client, but also still be around in 5 years, right? Nobody likes to pick, and that's where, the DNA comes and helps out with that. But even there, so there's sometimes where, JavaScript frameworks for the 5 years ago were a roll of the dice and 6 months, and maybe it'd still be around and maybe it wouldn't. That area of life has firmed up quite a bit. But you want to have something that you can still be doing in 6 years, really, right? Like you don't want to be doing EJBs or .NET 2.0 or anything like that, even though there's probably millions of lines of both of those still being used every single day.
It's kind of like backing Silverlight.
Yeah.
Was not a good choice in retrospect.
Microsoft did us a favor. They gave us a 10-year window, at least. They said, we will not, this is going away in 10 years. Starting now, click. And
they set the timer.
And they set the timer. And they've held to it, right?
And to their credit, when they do make these changes, I've seen them push that date out farther and farther. They do a good job of just not completely slamming the door.
No.
They give you time.
They don't tell you next week
storing,
it's going away.
Yeah, Stream has a new face to it, and it's not the direct storage for video in Microsoft 365 anymore. Right. So now there's a whole migration thing going on. The thing they did a couple weeks ago is they just killed the ability to add more video to Stream.
Right.
Like, okay, now we're not gonna move your other stuff.
Now you really got to get serious.
Put your new stuff somewhere, and it was forced. And it was a surprise because I wasn't reading the updates that come in because there's so many of them. It's hard to keep up with. I'm migrating, and I got plenty of time to do it, but I'm doing it now.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point about staying connected and staying on top of things. And it's a hard thing to do. Like Chad pointed out, having 180 people do little bits of it make it a lot easier. And you can have people tell you, do not hook your wagon to Stream because it's going away. You just don't know when yet, or what have you, right? To be fair, Kyle, you did tell us that it was going away.
Yeah.
And you did mention it more than 6 months ago.
Right. What I didn't do is create the alternative.
You didn't. You said it's going away. I'm going to coast for a little bit, and so it just became a little bit more important.
Salesforce, their workflow thing called Process Builder is going away, and they have a new thing they call Flow, and so there's going to be moving those.
Fun times.
And that seems to be every year I run into something makes me do work that I wasn't really anticipating. Sometimes it's security though, based. And it's like, okay, we're not going to give you as much of a lead time. We're not going to give you as much of a choice. This has to happen because right now you've got a big security hole. And our name is on that product.
Yeah. 0 days are never fun. Chad, do you find you have to so you've been working on your project for about the entire time that you've been on this podcast.
Yes.
Have you upgraded Java versions?
Yeah, we have. We've actually got a pretty good cadence of addressing tech debt immediately in what we're doing. And so, yeah, we take that, and there's a certain skill to convincing folks from a business that no, this is not time. You're not going to see a new feature. You're not going to see we're going to lose velocity on feature development to address this, and this.
Right.
And it's not super sexy, but it's necessary. And then the question, well, why? What if we just waited another year? Well, then,
then it costs this much more to do it in another year.
Yeah, the time commitment goes up and up and up every sprint that you don't address some, tech debt.
Right.
So yes, we do. I'd like to think that we do fairly well at addressing it early enough to, we catch it at the right time to make it so it's not like this traumatic event to upgrade.
Right.
A core library or our language or our framework or our tools around that stuff.
Have you been involved in any dramatic, painful upgrades in your career?
Yeah, but it's not necessarily like a single product that has that's mostly like a modernization thing, right?
Sure.
Where hey, this thing over here, we've been using it for 15 years and now we need that same thing, but we recognize that ecosystem has gotten stale and we need something better. Or at least maybe not even better. We just need like for like, right? Like give us that thing in a modern tech stack. Right. I've done that before. I haven't necessarily just been bitten by not upgrading to a current version of something or not trying. Because like I said, I've been embarrassingly lucky with the technology choices that I
feel like
I've had no choice but to be part of things that go bad or are very difficult to upgrade just because SharePoint. Weapon of choice. That's where I lived and breathed. And there was a lot of, going from 2003 to 2007,
which is 4 years.
I found myself spending a weekend nonstop, completely rebuilding something because that whole feature went away and was replaced by something else. And there was no migrate. It was just you're recreating this thing that you did once before.
Right.
That was a 2-month project, and now you get to redo it in a weekend so that people can work on Monday. Migrations have been very difficult, especially 2007 go to later versions because of the way people were making customizations and adopting these giant feature packs that wouldn't migrate and things like that. So desire to try out that stuff, have those features in place. That was a mistake. They had something called the Fab 40. All these different templates and tools and wonderful things. And
not so fab.
They were just a mistake and caused all sorts of issues. So the pocket was not real big. Mm-hmm. It was really difficult to stay in it. And you had to be almost psychic, a prophet of some sort, to see that coming. And that
was a big growth.
And that was an industry-wide shift and a whole paradigm shift, doing low code and mixing low code with custom code. Custom code kind of became a no-no if you're going to do SharePoint.
Right.
A lot of organizations just put a ban on it and said, we're not doing that.
Because it made it impossible to upgrade.
Right. And you had to maintain that expertise as well if you had to make changes or fix things. So I think you find that really in any technology, keeping up with the changes, not getting ahead of your skis, which is a new phrase I've adopted and used way too much in the last week. I need to back off. It's a challenge and you're not always given a lot of choice. But like you were saying, trying to go with the most stable option, the best thing you can trust, I guess, at the time.
The most supported thing.
And, Chad, you mentioned using tools from one company.
I did. Did I?
Yeah. You said
like
you
IntelliJ.
tools.
So it's your trust in that company that kind of feeds your decision-making process on adopting those tools.
Yeah. I think I don't necessarily trust them. The tools are, and they're not stagnant. Right. So this is why I don't think I think there's still a significant presence with a competing tool called Eclipse. My take on, Eclipse versus IntelliJ, Eclipse just kind of stopped innovating, right? It was the same tool since it was essentially visual age, right? It evolved from that. So the fact that the IntelliJ folks continuously innovate, excited and invested in their tool set. The minute they stop, I'm not a zealot. So yeah, if there's a better option, I'm going to go there, right? I know AWS is doing a lot of really cool things with like cloud dev tools, like your dev tools in the cloud, right?
Right.
And Microsoft is doing very, very cool things, right? I think a lot of companies are copying the Visual Studio Code, right? Like the minimalist kind of IDE. IntelliJ is doing almost the exact same thing. They have a public alpha release of this new browser that looks a lot like VS Code. It's called Fleet. So it's not necessarily that I trust them, Kyle. It's just they haven't relaxed. They haven't rested. They're not just coasting on anything. They're consistently providing new functionality and new value to me as a user.
And you probably didn't jump over to IntelliJ, the first point release, 0.1 beta or anything like that, right?
No, it was, moving from Eclipse to IntelliJ, it was a traumatic kind of event when we made that call at one of my prior gigs. Like, it was for a couple of reasons. One, it's not free. You actually have to pay for it. Eclipse was open source, and it was really easy to justify. Oh, free. That's easy. IntelliJ is not. For an enterprise license. It's money. And then just, boy, you know this, Peter, as a developer, like all your shortcuts, all of your infinite amount of ways that you can get to a breakpoint even, right? Like all of that stuff is that muscle memory just goes away when you switch to a new tool, right? Like you don't necessarily probably have this problem with Microsoft tool sets, right? Because as a .NET developer, I would imagine that Microsoft has a maybe relatively well-adapted set of dev tools around that. Yeah.
Yes, but they are getting better, but there have been tripping points along the way, like the 6.0 tools to the next level tools. We're going to change all your shortcuts because we found these other shortcuts to be very hard for us to code. So we've done the work and we've standardized them and we've made better shortcuts. But even so, yeah, it hurt a lot.
Yeah. So I think what we're getting at is it's the opposite of early adoption and the opposite of just going with vanilla tool sets and everything else,
right?
To make it easy, to make the total cost of ownership relatively manageable. Staying on IntelliJ for me isn't necessarily a decision that I make because I love the company. It's because they do cool things constantly.
And that doesn't mean they can't at some point jump the shark. There's a lot of companies that were great for a long time and then something happened. And
remember Lotus, right?
I'm still dealing with Lotus every once in a while.
Yeah, because I had to migrate things from Lotus to SharePoint.
Right.
Even though they didn't really line up.
It wasn't really a migration, right? It was you had to recode things in SharePoint.
Rebuild.
To do things that did there.
Well, there was a migration tool that, would allow you to have to do that anyway, but at least you got to pay for the tool. No, I think that it's, when I look at what a big chunk of my job is service management. It's what used to be systems management.
Right.
But now I have to deal with, I don't get to touch the hardware. I don't get to touch the code base. I can only configure, or I can tack on to it. But then I have to keep up with things. If I want to go beyond out of the box, I might grab something off of GitHub. Then am I keeping it up to date? Is it at some point it's not going to work because the framework changed or something? Like
you got sick of supporting it.
Yeah. It's like keeping up with those changes and then all of the things, all this connective tissue between things. One thing I'm seeing is the relationship between the cloud providers that have to integrate and run in browsers with browser security. Mm-hmm. So Safari is really locked down.
Yeah.
Compared to other browsers. And so we're finding that some of our stuff just like we got to use Chrome. It's just not, Safari's too locked down for it.
Hello, IE.
Still in there. It's just hidden, buried deep in Edge, but it's still in there somewhere. We got rid of it. It's gone. It's okay.
But yeah, it's getting more important to stay in the middle of the pack as the pack shrinks and the pack moves faster. Changes are happening at a much greater rate than they used to.
Yeah. Some changes are necessary, some are not.
Right.
My parting thought is, do we really have to change Azure AD to Entera or Entra? Do we really have to rename stuff so frequently? Office 365 becomes Microsoft 365, but a lot of people don't know that. So I have to call things Microsoft 365 and put Office 365 behind it. Now I got to update.
It was
a lot of, yeah.
It was something before 365, though, wasn't it? I don't remember what it was called.
It was
no.
God.
Yeah. Funny you should mention
Portal.
that, because that's gone. Right?
Portal service?
Hotmail's gone.
I don't know. I can't remember. Yeah, it's, change is inevitable. But please don't make us do too many unnecessary changes just because you have a marketing department that's clever.
But a new name.
Remember Metro?
No. What was Metro?
The Windows 8 UI.
Oh yeah.
With the square, basically the squares. Right. Chad, any parting thoughts?
I haven't used Windows since Windows XP. Has it changed much?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. Not too
just
much.
In general, not just
You'll
about
be fine.
Windows. Yeah.
You'll be fine.
A parting thought. I mean, a lot of this stuff, like I said, it's not horrible to adopt things super, super fast. Necessarily our recommended approach to adopt bleeding edge into a super important
core business.
Thank you, Peter. Into core business without knowing damn sure what the total cost of ownership might look like.
Right.
And it helps to be lucky, I guess.
Sometimes you got to gamble. Like went through platform selection on an intranet like 3 or 4 years ago, and it was, well, by the time we're done, it's going to have everything we need. We're going to double if we double the release times of these things in case they're late. We've seen the examples. We've seen it in action. So they've got it kind of there.
They started.
So yeah, and that's the final thing we need to really meet all the requirements. Then there's going to be a lot of other benefits and costs. Like this is basically no cost to you because you're already paying for it. That was a bleeding edge risk that I think paid off. But if you can avoid it, if we didn't have to take that risk, then it would have been safer. I would have liked to go with a safer bet. Would have liked to hit a 6-iron instead of driver on that hole.
Stay in the middle, Dave Vanilla.
And with that, I think we'll say goodbye, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Everybody.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.